Welcome, everyone. My name is Saeed Dyanatkar, and I'm coming to you from Vancouver, BC, in Canada. I work at the University of British Columbia and oversee UBC Studios and the Emerging Media Lab, which is where we do produce immersive media at the university. Before we start the session, I would like to acknowledge that UBC is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation people. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of the land you are coming from. I am acting as the chair today, and basically what I do is I introduce the presenters and keep the time. Feel free to post your questions on the chat, and then we'll have 5 minutes at the end of each presentation to answer those questions, hopefully. So the first presenter is Chioma Udeozor, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And the presentation is titled Assessment Framework for Immersive Learning, Application and Evaluation. Chioma, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Saeed. My name is Chioma Udeozor, you pronounced it right. And I'm based at Newcastle with Newcastle University. I'll be presenting an assessment framework that we designed for measuring learning in immersive environment. So an overview of what I'll be covering. I'll be covering the assessment framework, which is known as the game-based assessment framework. Its application to an AR game, as well as a qualitative evaluation of the framework, initial qualitative evaluation of the framework. The game-based assessment framework came out of the need to provide a simple but structured basis for designing assessments for measuring learning when using immersive applications. And it was specifically designed to meet the needs of educators. It's underpinned by the evidence-centered design framework, which is popular for game-based assessment or large-scale game-based assessment and stealth assessment, and the constructive alignment principles, which is commonly used in the university settings or higher education. It's made up of 5 components: the overall objective, the learning outcome, game tasks, scoring metrics, and grading method. So the overall objective of an assessment or lesson informs the learning outcome that will be measured. And this in turn informs the choice of immersive application or game that will be used. And because many of the games have, different tasks or levels, this would also mean that different scoring metrics, which are a product of, game metrics, would be used to measure whatever learning outcomes that are specified. And then there is a grading method that would also be used to curate the data collected by the scoring metrics. Here is an application of the game-based assessment framework to the design of assessment for an AR game known as MA game. So it's a titration game, a game that was designed to help or to teach high school and early and students in higher education, the first few years of higher education, titration operation. The learning outcomes for this game are as follows: to set up the titration equipment, to assess the nature of the chemicals, acid and bases used for titration, calculate pH of a mixture of acid and bases, and observe safety protocols in the lab. So here is the framework for this assessment. The overall objective, like I said, is acid-based titration, and the learning outcomes are specified. The game levels, there are 3 game levels for the MAR game, and the scoring metrics used to measure this learning outcomes are number of errors made, which is, a log data integrated into, that is collected by the game, and as well as answers to a multiple choice question, or a few multiple choice questions, measuring some of the learning objectives. And then we also have the number of hints received during the process of conducting the titration tasks. And here is an example of something we put together for the grading method. So for level 1, we had weighting for each of the learning outcome, because multiple learning outcomes are measured in each level, we had to weigh each of them in order to determine the scores of students, or the percentage they scored. And also we had a grading criteria for performance in each level, which is, 0 to 40 will be graded as novice performance, 41 to 80 as competent performer, and 81 to 100 as expert. This is specifically for research purpose, and we decided on this weightings and this grading criteria given the level of the academic level and familiarity with AR of the student participants we intend to carry out this research with. And they are high schools, they are university students in their first years who have not necessarily used AR for learning before. In terms of the evaluation of the game-based assessment framework, we carried out an initial evaluation with 3 university staff, their teaching staff, 2 male, 1 female. We did individual semi-structured interviews with each of them. The results from the evaluation showed that the framework was, that the educators found the framework easy to understand and apply. However, there was a lot of emphasis on their design of application or immersive application rather than on assessment. So like here is a quote: "I think this is easy to understand and implement for assessment design," pointing to the tasks in the game-based assessment framework. "This is the big problem. How do we design this environment? If you can tell me or give me a framework like this, that will make it easier." Just an indication that we are still at the very beginning of, still at the initial stage of immersive learning, where a lot of educators are still eager to find applications that are relevant to them, with assessment coming as afterthoughts. So to conclude, the game-based assessment framework seemed to be a simple, structured, and logical process of designing assessments for learning. And the application of the framework to the AR game demonstrate, as well as other, we've also applied it to a computer game and a VR game, and collected data on those. It seems pretty straightforward for to use in terms of designing and implementing assessment. For this study, the limitations include, the sample size of the participants who evaluated the framework, a lack of extensive application of the framework to, immersive applications or immersive environments, and usability evaluation, which is, getting educators to actually do the work to design assessments and implement it using the game-based assessment framework. And lastly, the lack of evaluation of its effectiveness. So I think it will be necessary to compare the outcome of an assessment that's been designed and implemented with the game-based assessment framework, with already established assessment procedures or methods. Yeah, thank you. Come to the end of my.
Thank you, Chioma. Any questions? Feel free to unmute and ask your questions. I think that's probably easier.
More of a comment and reaction. I'm highly impressed with your approach for this, because like our schools in America, many of them lack laboratory spaces and expenses associated with that. So giving students that hands-on experience through virtual reality is just so beneficial. A way they can still engage with the content even when those spaces don't physically exist.
Thank you.
Chioma, are you yourself a producer of the content? Have you had any experience in that area?
Designing an application, is that what you mean?
Yeah, the virtual content or immersive content. The reason I'm
No.
asking, I have a follow-up question, because sometimes when we are talking to content creators, when we ask the question about assessment, the response is it would be much similar to what you heard from your participants. It would be much easier if it's already built in, so the information could be gathered and while the experience is being built, and then it would be much easier to collect data that way. Have you had that kind of experience?
I totally agree. So for this particular AR game, we designed it fresh. It's not an existing game. So I'm part of an EU project, a European project that brings together 15 researchers. It's called Charming, so chemical engineering immersive learning. It brings together 15 researchers to look at different aspects of immersive learning, from design to assessment to and for different age groups as well, children, higher education, and employees in factories in the chemical industry. So we designed the VR games together. Sorry, a VR game with some of the colleagues. I think one of the colleagues, it was his main project to design a VR game for teaching laboratory safety to employees. But this game was also, the VR game was also used in my university for chemical engineering students. And it was, in fact, we also had a game, an existing game that we used at the beginning of the project when COVID hit. And you could tell the difference with the existing game and the VR game. For the VR game, we designed assessment during the design phase. So we were able to collect the kind of data we wanted and the way we wanted it. We were able to put in those weighings for different metrics to assess competencies that we were interested in. But for the game, it took a longer process, and we had to, for me as a researcher, I had to play all 57 levels of that particular game. I had to identify what the learning outcomes were, because there is a manual. There was the design manual for the game, but they didn't necessarily put into consideration assessment at that time. It was, to get a working game out. That was the goal. So it took like a reverse engineering kind of process to walk through the game, identify what the learning outcomes were, how we could have measured it, and the metrics associated with each learning outcome. It was a hard process, and I don't think if it's a kind of game that educators would want to use, it would be difficult or time consuming, not necessarily difficult, to go through this process. But for a game designed with assessments in mind, you have to tick all the boxes. You have to identify what the learning outcomes are. You have to identify how you measure them. And that means thinking through it from the outset and putting things in place to make it easy to measure. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, you were very efficient, and thank you so much for joining us at 2 a.m. your time.
Thank you.
Takes lots of
Thank you
commitment.
very much. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. And we can move to the next presentation. And the next presentation is titled A Framework for Analyzing Students' Behavior in Virtual Spaces on Mozilla Hubs. And our presenter is Kojiro Yano from Osaka Institute of Technology in Japan. Kojiro.
Hello. Could you spotlight my camera, because I'm presenting from my webcam instead of screen sharing?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much. So you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me start my presentation. Let me start my clock. Okay, there you go. Okay, so my name is Kojiro Yano. Nice to meet you. Today I'm going to talk about a framework for analyzing students' behavior in virtual spaces on Mozilla Hubs. So virtual spaces are important in education because they are ideal for social, collaborative learning, student learning, and experiential learning. However, designing virtual spaces can be complex because you need to adapt the layout depending on what you're teaching. You need to put interactive objects, and you need to add visual cues to navigate the students. So in order to ensure that students are using the virtual spaces effectively, we need to assess the impact of virtual spaces on learning. So how do we assess the student behavior? You can use summative evaluations such as assessments based on learning objectives or student feedback forms for subjective feelings. They are inexpensive, easy to implement. You can use, for example, Google Forms like that. But there are limitations. For example, it is difficult to link data to specific space design. And it is also challenging to record data repeatedly or in real time. So you can try monitoring methods in apps. For example, they are often used in gaming industry. So they use gameplay metrics. So they look at in-game time, users' location, the actions, or the items they have. So they measure these stats. And embedding such capacity for direct and continuous monitoring of student behaviors in virtual spaces can be useful to improve virtual space design. So effective data analysis and visualizations are important for meaningful insights. And you can try visualization methods for spatial data like heat map to visualize location and relative densities of data points. You can use trajectories to illustrate user journeys and movement patterns within virtual spaces. And both methods provide valuable insights into user behavior and inform decision-making for virtual space design. And to analyze student behavior with heat maps in 3D spaces, you can look at students' movement, or you can look at looked at areas. With students' movement, you can analyze students' navigation patterns and coverage of space to improve overall spatial design. If you looked at areas, you can analyze where students focus their attention to improve content placement and design to optimize students' engagement. So in this study, I wanted to provide a simple framework for user tracking analysis using commonly used platform for virtual spaces, and allow teachers to generate 3D heat maps of students' movement and looked at areas, and facilitate understanding of students' behavior in virtual spaces to improve design and learning outcomes. Now let me explain what I have actually done. I hosted virtual spaces, and I developed and hosted my virtual spaces using HubSpot Personnel on Amazon Web Services or AWS. And I integrated Plausible, which is an open source web analytics platform for tracking user data. So what I did was to add short scripts to HubSpot server to send user positions and rotations as custom events to Plausible. And the data were accumulated every 5 seconds and sent to Plausible server every 30 seconds to minimize costs. And I developed a Unity-based app to visualize data. So Unity engine is very useful for robust visualization capabilities. And first, I exported project files, .spoke file from Spoke, which is like this, which is Mozilla Hub's scene editor. So that I exported the project file from Spoke, then processed the Unity app processed JSON data to download essential 3D model files and 2D image files, because the Spoke saves the data on cloud. So I need to download the data from the cloud to process in Unity. So that's why this process is necessary. Then the app which display virtual space, allowing users' logs to be viewed for a specific scene or room. Now, let me show you how I represent user location attention. And I used arrowheads and heat maps. And for user head position and rotation, I used arrowheads for visualization. So they look like this. These yellow ones are arrowheads. And the arrowhead size are adjustable for optimal visibility. And I also used two 3D heat maps. And for 3D heat maps, I used a cylinder radius projected downward from head positions like this to produce a location heat map like this one. Then I also used cylinder radius from user positions and directions. That means starting from here and projecting, starting from here, projecting this way like that to produce attention heat map like this. And the app also has a first-person scene camera, which rotate with mouse and move with arrow keys on keyboard. Now, let me introduce the virtual space and tutorial tasks I used for this study. So the tutorial scene, which look like this, has got 4 points of interest and 3 main tasks for students to complete. On point 1 here, a manga instruction on object manipulation is available. On point 2, the task 1, the first task, that is to find and move a movable ball into a basket. So there are balls here, the basket here, then move the ball into the basket. So to practice object manipulation. Then the third point here, there's a task number 2, that is to instantiate a text tag using a chat window and place it on a nameplate. So it's a bit, I'm sorry, a bit hard to see. There's a nameplate here that you instantiate a text tag, then put that onto this name tag. This is also for object manipulation. And on point 4, there's task 3, which is to move, rotate, insert a key into a lock. There is a key somewhere here. Then you have to move and rotate the key, then put into the lock like this. Then I asked 142 students in a biology course to use the virtual space here. Then I assessed, they accessed this space separately on their PCs. So they're not going into the same room. They have separate instances. They access this space separately. Then they were asked to submit screenshots of their completed task via Google Classroom just to show that they have actually completed the tasks. Now, it's analysis. So first, the analysis of the student positions. So first one is the arrowhead plot, which is this. And it showed that students gathered around 4 points of interest, and crowds are largest at point 2 and point 4, indicating more engagement in these tasks. A location heat map look similar, but a little bit different. On location heat maps shows point 3 also has quite dense spots, indicating students spent a significant amount of time on second task. Let me explain a bit more about this finding. Like I said, the point 2 and point 4 has the largest area coverage on the arrowhead plot. I think that was because the first task at point 2 required students to move the ball closer to the basket. That means you pick the ball first, then you move like this way, then in front of the basket, you put the ball into the basket. That means you don't stay in one location. You move like this way to move the ball and put that into the basket. That's why it shows a bit dispersed arrowhead plot. And it was kind of similar on point 4 as well. So when they're doing the third tasks, they have to pick a key, then they have to rotate, then move the key, then put into the lock. So they have to move quite a lot, quite complex. That's why they move a lot, showing that result in a large area coverage. On the other hand, on location heat map, like I said, this point 3 had dense spots. That means they spend a lot of time there. And that means they struggled with the task, which involved chat texting. And chat texting, I didn't think it was too complicated, but for students, somehow it was complicated enough. So they have to spend lots of time to struggle with chat window. And you don't have to move to use the chat texting. So that's why they don't move a lot. That's why the space is narrow, but they have to spend a lot of time to finish the tasks. That's why it's narrow, but dense spots. So that's the finding. That's the interpretation of the finding. Now, let me show you the attention heat maps. So we have 4 images here. On the point 1, the right-hand panel had stronger signal. That is a reflection of the right to left reading pattern in Japanese manga. Unlike in Western countries, in Japanese manga, you read from right. That's why this spot is denser. On the point 2, you can see the stronger signal on the right-hand right sides of the ball group, indicating students started testing from right-hand side. So because there are 4 balls, but only one of them was movable. So they have to test one by one like this way. That's why they have a strong signal. And on the point 3, they have there's a nameplate, and that has got a very strong signal. And also this panel, this is manga again. Then it had a chat window instruction. Because they have to put the nameplate onto they have to put the text tag on the nameplate. That's why this has got strong signal. But they also needed to read instruction for text chatting. So that's why it is also a strong signal. And on the point 4, there is a strong signal here, and this one as well. And that is because there is an instruction about context menu on here, which actually look like this. So they needed to read quite carefully to complete the task over here, which required context menu. So that's why this part and this part had strong signals. Now let me explain a limitation of this framework. The heat map painted on the texture of the 3D models require clean and fully textured UV maps. So that means no overlapping areas or texture tiling allowed. And the vertex colors won't work. And adequate margins between islands in UV maps are essential to avoid bleeding and false high signal artifacts. And you can actually see the artifacts here and here because the UV wasn't perfect enough in this 3D model. Another limitation is the overrepresentation of users who left the room running without engaging in activities, which causes misleading hotspots on heat maps like these red spots. I don't think all of them are genuine. Some of them just left the room, left the computer with with the room running, so there was no actual activities with these users. To prevent that, we can implement a user inactivity timeout, that is to automatically remove or fade out data points from users who have been inactive for a certain period. Or you can use tracking user interactions, that is to incorporate mouse clicks, keyboard inputs, and other interactions to monitor for better understanding of user engagement levels. So let me conclude the presentation. This framework successfully analyzed student behavior in virtual spaces through arrowhead plots, location heat map, and attention heat maps. And the analysis provided insights in the task difficulties and students' focus on specific points of interest during the tutorial. However, there are limitations such as the need for fully textured 3D models with clean UV maps and the overrepresentation of inactive users. So I need to improve that. And other improvements can include, for example, trajectory visualizations, clustering, and live data display. I haven't tried them yet. Maybe in the next conference, I can present these improvements. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was amazing. Excellent work. So I'm going to open the floor for questions for your jury. I'll have a question. You mentioned that static users would basically affect your data. Have you tried to basically see how you can eliminate that type of data from your results?
I haven't tried them yet, but I think the simplest one is to just count users who have been on the same spot for, say, 5 or 10 minutes, because it's very unnatural. So I can eliminate these users' data to reduce this artifact, but I haven't tried them yet. But that's the plan.
Yeah, it's amazing that you are using these tools together. Is there any way for people who are interested to access basically the combination of tools that you created? Is there some sort of open source version of this that people can access?
I can make it open, but like I said, I have these issues still, so that I need to implement these improvements before I can make it open, because at the moment it's not reliable enough, in my opinion. Great.
Well, I can't wait to see that work later in the next conference. Any questions?
I think there is a question on the chat window, but I can't see from VR very carefully, very clearly.
Yeah, I can read it for you. Thanks for the sharing. I am wondering, are there any specific learning tasks in your experiment? And a small question, can you make an introduction to how to generate your avatar in Zoom? It's in Virbela.
Okay, the first question is a learning task, right?
Yeah.
So in this study, the learning task was to learn how to use object manipulation in Mozilla Hubs. Because in my classroom, I use Mozilla Hubs Seeing every time. Then I ask them to spend, say, 10 or 15 minutes to manipulate stuff. For example, I have 2 molecules, then I ask them to put them together in a correct way. So they have to manipulate objects. But students often find it very difficult. So that's why I needed to design a scene like this to for them to practice. I also ask them to name a structure in virtual space. And when I ask that, they need to use a name tag, like I said. So that's why they need to practice how to use this. So it's very unclear. There's a chat window here. So they need to use this chat window to type a text and instantiate it. So in this scene is specifically designed for this kind of object manipulation so that they can smoothly transfer into a real learning task for them to do in future classrooms.
And the second part of the question.
Also, the second one. This I'm using my own application. I developed this application myself to give a live presentation from virtual space, and this is done on Zoom. So my app allow me to send the image from virtual space onto webcam, like a virtual web camera. So that's why I need to use webcam on Zoom to show my presentation. So it's my own application. It's called Virtual Presentation Space.
Looks great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Fujiro.
Thank you very much.
And good luck with the next phase of your work.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
All right. So last but not least, we have a presentation from Julie Fott and Sarah Eisenman, if I spell it correctly or pronounce it correctly. Are you presenting together, Julie, or are you presenting by yourself?
We're presenting together.
Great.
In fact, Sarah Heitzelman's going to lead us off.
Okay, great. So the title of the presentation, as you can see, is Open Doors to the Arts, Community Engaged Immersive Learning for Students with Disabilities. And the floor is yours, please.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to be here to share some of our work. Julie and I are from Centennial School of Lehigh University. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but we're from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in the United States. We're going to kick things off with a quick video explaining our project. At Centennial School, we serve students with emotional and behavioral disorders. We know how important it is to actively engage our students and help them to make connections to the curriculum. We wanted to design a space where we could take our students to places they learn about in their coursework. We also wanted to create a place where students could experience meditation and yoga. We installed an immersive learning center, or ILC, where 3 walls of an interior classroom form a continuous image around the room. Inside the ILC, students can view 360 YouTube videos, still photos, and Google Slides can be resized to fit around the walls of the room. Our next goal is to give students access to the arts through our Open Doors to the Arts project. Using a Matterport Pro 3 camera, undergraduate students at Lehigh University are scanning art galleries, theaters, outdoor sculpture displays, and museums to create 360 and 3D tours. These tours can be displayed inside the ILC, and students can navigate the virtual tour as if they were physically in the space. The undergraduate students creating the tours research the art gallery that houses the display to create tours to create video hotspots for key pieces of artwork. Selected pieces of artwork have videos that scaffold the viewing of the artwork for students by explaining the artwork and asking questions to help students think critically about each piece of art. Our goal is to create a bank of tours where schools with similar spaces can access our tours and teacher guides to support each tour. In addition to arts-based tours, we will also be creating tours to help support our students in the community in places such as doctors' offices, restaurants, grocery stores, and field trip locations.
As Sarah had mentioned, we work at Centennial School of Lehigh University, and in that school, it's a very special place. We have 2 missions. We serve children with emotional behavior problems as well as autism. And then the second mission has to do with training. All of our teachers are seeking advanced degrees in the area of special education. So we do dense training around topics in special education and leadership to help them become exceptional educators. All of our students come from we're a day program. So our students come from about a 60-mile radius, as close as the town that we reside in, as well as very long bus rides. So one of the things we do at Centennial School is we teach school-wide positive behavior support. And in that, what you're seeing on the screen now is expectations for our ILC. Every area of our building is defined with very clear expectations for behavioral success. And what you see is 5 slogans to help remember what those are. So you see, be there, be ready, be responsible, be respectful, keep hands and feet to self, maintain personal space, and follow directions. And those 5 slogans go throughout every setting in our building. Particularly for our ILC, you can see specifics about what behaviors we're looking for within each of those expectations. That's just an example of how we directly teach our students at the school, because we know that they need that direct instruction to be successful. Something else that we've learned about our students is that they tend to lack experiences that many kids would encounter just through their daily lives, and particularly with exposure to the arts. So Sarah and I developed this project to help fill that gap where our students who, because of their disabilities and the natures of their problems, are unable to successfully participate in oftentimes art galleries or other types of performances. This is a way for us to bring the arts to them, give them the scaffolded supports to be successful, and then hopefully pique their interest and curiosity in the arts and be more successful in live performances or in galleries.
So about 2 years ago, we installed our Immersive Learning Center, and it's certainly been exciting to see how our students respond, and a place that everyone really loves coming to. And as Julie mentioned, we really wanted to make it a space that students could access things that otherwise wouldn't be possible, including things like the arts. So we were able to recruit about 5 undergraduate students who work with us and are developing content based on our discussions together and trying to figure out what can we do to give our students access to the arts. We meet with these undergraduate students once a week for about an hour. And in our meetings, we've scaffolded for them a few steps that we're going to talk about in a moment that will help those students to really break down learning about our population of students and developing content that's really meaningful for them. And these Lehigh students are students from all different disciplines. So that's been really exciting for us because we have the opportunity to work with these students and get to know their strengths, use their strengths. Some of them are really involved in the arts. Others have completely different majors, and they're coming to us wanting to learn about special education and how they can use 360 photos and videos to design experiences. And this connection is really made possible by the creative inquiry projects that we have access to, working with some folks at Lehigh to help make these visuals and really the project come to life. And that's allowed us to work with the Lehigh Art Gallery that's on campus and helped us to build some of those connections. Our students are also enrolled in a class at Lehigh that helps them walk through the entrepreneurship process of designing a product and what that looks like, and really breaking down the steps of building something new.
And as Sarah was mentioning, we have broken down our project into 7 stages, and that allows us to establish learning objectives. And Sarah, I think you're going to go over those in a moment.
Yes, we worked with our undergraduate students to figure out what do they need to do to design for our students, and what would it mean for them to develop content. And part of that was observing students, our students in the ILC, in lessons that were developed by our teachers so that they could better understand how do the students currently interact with the content, and then take those findings from that observation and figure out what does that translate into when we're designing? What do we have to think about as designers of new content?
And during this stage, we were interested in having them explore different types of cameras. Sarah mentioned the Matterport 3 Pro, We also have another camera that we were using as well, the InstaPro 2, that allows us to take 360 images and video, whereas the Matterport camera has the 3D element. And we ultimately landed on the 3D element as something that would be superior for this type of project.
And then in our next stage, we were taking a look at having the undergraduate students investigate a local art gallery. So at this point, they've already learned about how to take the footage and how to develop that footage, as well as observed our students. And then they went back to the art gallery to determine what would students look at when they were there and how would they experience it at a K-12 level. What would they maybe want to explore? So that meant they needed to spend a lot of time in the gallery and really looking around and figuring out what students would be interested in, how they might want to interact with the pieces, so that the experience they would design then would be meaningful.
And as Sarah was mentioning, not only learning about how our students learn and would be consuming or interacting with the arts, but knowing that all of our students are students with disabilities, we wanted to have our undergraduates understand how that learning process can be different for our students and how they'll have to create this environment to be something that our students could benefit from. So learning a lot about activating the prior knowledge of our students was really important in this step. And during this time, they also, in addition to reading some articles that Sarah and myself had assigned for them, they had opportunities to observe and interact with our students at the school, and they can see what that would look like.
Our next step was taking the 360 camera into the space. We started with the Insta360 Pro 2, and then we moved into the Matterport scans. We wanted to be able to see the content in the Immersive Learning Center, so we needed to get some test shots to figure out things like how high should we have the monopod, or how close do we need to be to the art so that a student viewing it could actually read what's on the walls. And through those experiments, we were able to take the footage and put it into Matterport scans as more of our final product for now. And that was exciting for the students to be able to see the work that they took from those Matterport scans and put it around the walls of the ILC.
They also, at that stage, when they recorded their videos for their select pieces, they were able to hear how they sounded in those environments and to see those videos and understand the vocabulary that they selected for those brief 1-minute videos. And they learned a lot about that. And in that process, as you can imagine, they did some re-recording to create better videos for our audience. And then when we go into our stage 6, this is where we had students come in and access and experience that immersive content that our undergraduates created, and give our undergraduates some feedback about what they were seeing and how they were interacting with it. Certainly a very rewarding experience for our undergraduates to see the delight of our students and the pure joy of being able to be in the art gallery and to experience art that way. There is a lot of enthusiasm from our students in viewing this project.
Ultimately, we want to be able to share the Matterport scans and tours and teacher guides that we create with other schools. So we're excited that a school very close to us is putting in one of these immersive learning centers. This is a construction photo from there. And we look forward to being able to share these scans with people from around the world. We believe that part of being in this space and being on the cutting edge is being ready to share. So this next step for us is taking what we've learned, taking the content that we've curated, and then sharing it with other people so that others from around the world can access the places that we have close to us, and hopefully we can reciprocate and see some interesting places in other parts of the world.
We've given a lot of tours of our space and been able to help coach some other schools with how they could construct a room like the one we have here. We took the least desirable classroom for a teacher. It was a classroom with no windows, and we transformed it into one of the best places that we have in our school that our teachers and our students can't wait to get into. And so we've been able to work with a number of schools and helping them see how they can make this a reality in their environment as well. We currently began with our Open Doors to the Arts initiative, and that's been our current focus. We're going to continue to work on the arts and bringing different types of art environments to our students. But we know that's really just the tip of the iceberg for this, and that we really want to open all doors, not just the arts, but really open all doors for our students. And so that means that we're already in the planning process of scanning additional places, bringing other places for them to see. Movie theaters, grocery stores, restaurants, doctors' offices. Really, there's just so many places that our students could use this type of support and experience that environment in our ILC, and really pinpoint on that direct instruction that they'll need to be successful in places that, let's face it, right now they don't go to because of their disability and because it's just too challenging for them to be there. And so oftentimes that means that they miss out on the entire experience altogether.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time to listen. And at this point, we'll take any questions.
Fascinating work. Thank you. That's great. I love the fact that undergraduate students were actually creating the content themselves. Any questions?
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm Cynthia. I love this project. We just built a room like this here, and we are learning how to use Motherboard, but we are interested in taking 3D scans of industries, because it's very hard to let our students go to real industries in our engineering programs, for example. And I was wondering if you ask your students to do any kind of activity while they are moving around the scenes or afterwards.
So let me make sure I understand your question. Are the students able to move around while they're in that space? Is that kind of getting at what you're asking there?
What students have to do? They just look at it, or you ask them to do something after, to reflect or anything like this?
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. There's so many things that we have our students doing in this space. In fact, we generate more ideas than we're really able to implement all at once. And that's one of the things Sarah and I do is let's focus on having our teachers be able to run the room to do, certain things at a time. We'll have our students go into the room and, for example, we can show 12 browsers around the room. And so some of our teachers, with Sarah's help, have developed Jamboards. And so they may be visiting places around the world, and then they'll have their own space on the wall to interact in a Jamboard, their own Jamboard, and the teacher can be monitoring the student's work. The student gets to see it on the large screen there. We'll use it for things like activating prior knowledge. Some of the readings that our kids do are very young kids. They lack the vocabulary understanding, and even going over the vocabulary in a traditional sense isn't quite as enlightening for them as seeing that vocabulary in the ILC, when they see it in action. Some of our middle school students learning about the Civil War and being able to see some of those reenactments, it made their understanding of the readings that they were doing much more enriched, and they were saying things and using that vocabulary that they were seeing and learning about in that space. They were using it much more than what we see in a traditional classroom. Sarah, I know you probably have some of your favorites too of the ways that kids interact in that room.
With the Matterport scans, really the hotspots are what are helping us to create the interactions. So the videos that we're overlaying are really scaffolding the learning for our students. So if a student would typically like walk up to a piece of artwork, they might spend 5 seconds there and be like, oh, this is cool, and then walk away, go to the next piece. Instead, the hotspot's there, and a video will pop up and give a 1 to 2 sentence description of the video, and then say, what do you see? How does this make you feel? What are you thinking this piece is all about? And then we might have a physical piece of paper that they write the answers to those questions on. So we're kind of creating some of these field guides that will go with it. And that's helping the interactions to be more than we're consuming this content, and instead taking it to that next level with the critical thinking piece.
Thank you. There's a question that I just wanted to make sure before we are running out of time. I'll read that question from Kojiro, and he's asking, how do you cater to a variety of disabilities such as hard of hearing?
With the YouTube videos, we will closed caption those and turn on the closed captioning so that students could read those, as well as making sure that any of the 360 videos that we show, we can always turn that on too.
Great, thanks. And also Kevin is asking all the presenters to if they can share the contact so they can contact you later. Any other questions? I have one. So the arcade that was installed in the classroom, was it built on site by your team, or did you purchase it turnkey?
It was built on site. We had that customized based on, it was an existing classroom, a classroom that teachers hated to be assigned to because it had no windows. And so we thought, what a better way to use this space as to use it for something like this. And so every dimension of the room, it takes a lot of math to figure out how many projectors, for example, we have. The room is not completely square, it's more of a rectangle. And so we have 2 longer walls. And so there's a lot of math behind the stitching of all those projectors to make sure it's a seamless image. And so there's 6 short throw projectors, which means you can be very close to those walls without casting your shadow. We have surround sound in there. But yeah, we had that custom built.
Great, thank you. And then one last question for you. Who is the teacher acting as the tour guide and navigates the space, or would one of the students do that?
It can be either. Right now, it's the teacher that will do that, but ultimately we want our students to be able to really be guiding where the tour is going to next.
Great. And if I may, one last question. The undergraduate students who were involved, were they directly involved with any sort of disability, or they had some sort of interaction with potential users before they start the work, or was it after the work?
Some of them had some experience. I think at least one of them is studying education, but most of their experience came through our observations and then watching our students interact in the ILC.
Great, thank you. Fascinating. We are on time. Thank you so much for your excellent presentations, and hopefully we'll see you later in June.